Well, hello there, Spooky Reads fans. Here I am today, alongside my Halloween decorations, to talk about the story The Woman in Black by Susan Hill. So this was published in the 80s, but it is so steeped in so many of the great traditions of Gothic fiction that it feels like a classic. When you read it, you're like, ooh, this must have been written in 1850 or something like that. But no, it was in the 1980s. And Susan Hill does a great job pulling from some of my favorite tropes, the things that feed into Gothic kinds of tales. You've got an ingenue who's possibly fragile, has had some tragedy in their past. Because one of the things that comes up again and again in Gothic fiction is kind of this idea that when a bad thing happens to you, you're open in a different way to other bad things, and like ghost and spooky occurrences are maybe more likely to come to people who face some tragedy already. And we have that with our narrator. And of course, the other thing is a really great eerie setting, and a goodly portion of the story takes place at Eel Marsh House. I should listen to the name of it, right? Eel Marsh House. How awesome is that? But it's an appropriately large and frightening kind of manner, and it's set in a marsh. So at different times of day, depending on what's going on with the tides, it's actually cut off from every place else because of the tides, and the ground is all marshy, which leads to the basic tragedy. The woman in black of the title is our ghost, of course, and when we get her story, she had a tragic death, and the marshes are involved, and there you go. So one of the things that makes this different, and not just like, oh, okay, it's a great Gothic story that plays in my different tropes, is that our main character is a man. And that's really unusual in a Gothic story. In fact, part of the reason I think that a lot of Gothic stories work is that they play on that idea that a woman's point of view is discounted, right? That the woman sees something scary, she tells people, and they're like, oh, you and your womanish imagination, right? But in this case, our role of, slightly fragile ingenue is played by a man, Arthur Kipp. And the story starts with a frame, as all the best ones do. I guess I love a good frame story. So in this case, everybody's sitting around at a holiday celebration telling ghost stories, and his family pushes him, and he's an older man at the beginning, to tell a ghost story. And he's like, I don't have one. And they're like, surely you do. Everybody's got one, right? And he freaks out and he walks out and won't participate in the family activity of telling ghost stories. And then we find out it's because he does have a ghost story, and it still harrows him to his soul. So he's going to tell us by writing it down. So I'm going to read from a part sort of close to the beginning, when he's talking about when he was younger and when he got that job going to Eel Marsh House. In London, I lived for my work, apart from some spare time spent in the study and collecting of watercolors. I was then 35 and had been a widower for the past 12 years. See, told you, past tragedy. I had no taste at all for social life, and although in good general health, was prone to occasional nervous illnesses and conditions as a result of the experiences I will come to relate. Truth to tell, I was growing old well before my time. A somber, pale-complexioned man with a strained expression. A dull dog. I remarked to Mr. Bentley on the calm and sweetness of the day, and after a sideways glance in my direction, he said, you should think of getting yourself something in this direction. Why not? Pretty little cottage. Down there, perhaps. And he pointed with his whip to where a tiny hamlet was tucked snugly into the bend of the river below, white walls basking in the afternoon sunshine. Bring yourself out of town some of these Friday afternoons. Take to walking. Fill yourself with fresh air and good eggs and cream. The idea had a charm, but only a distant one, seemingly unrelated to myself, and so I merely smiled and breathed in the warm scents of the grasses and the field flowers, and watched the dust kicked up off of the lane by the pony's hooves, and thought no more about it. Until, that is, we reached a stretch of road leading past a long, perfectly proportioned stone house, set on a rise, above a sweeping view down over the whole river valley, and then for miles away into the violet-blue lines of hills in the distance. At that moment, I was seized by something I cannot precisely describe, an emotion, a desire. No, it was rather more a knowledge, a simple certainty which gripped me. and all so clear and striking that I cried out involuntarily for Mr. Bentley to stop, and almost before he had time to do so, climbed out of the pony trap into the lane and stood on a grassy knoll, gazing first up at the house, so handsome, so utterly right for the position it occupied, a modest house, and yet sure of itself, and then looking across to the country beyond. I had no sense of having been here before, but an absolute conviction that I would come here again, that the house was already mine, bound to me invisibly. So I loved that moment of like insight, like coming to the house and you're like, oh, this is mine. That feeling of magic. That was well done, I thought. And also just, we laid out right away how this guy is susceptible for this kind of experience because he's had this kind of experience before. So yes, if you have not read The Woman in Black, I think you will find it wonderfully tense, playing in all of the great things that make Gothic fiction great, and also something a little bit different. So happy reading. Enjoy it.